So, in this video, I'm going to talk about the Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy artifact set lore. First I talk a bit about the domain where we get this set, and then I'll get into the lore of the artifact set and also some theories that can be derived from this lore. I think that now is a good time to make a video about this, because this set provides a lot of additional context to the new world quest about Remuria. Now there is a disclaimer, this video is just a theory and not facts. Unfortunately I can read the developers' minds, so I just have to let them cook and theorize. This is all just my opinion, so if you disagree with anything I say, please tell me why in the comments down below. So, for now, let's start with a bit of information about the domain. I'll read the two descriptions and explain what they are about. So, the domain called Faded Theater is described to us in the game like this. The Prophet and the Ruler, heroes and fell dragons, the grand opera of the Golden Age once played out here. Now, the only players left on the stage are monsters of unknown provenance. You shall earn priceless artifacts if and only if you can defeat them. So right from the start we can see this description is quite lore heavy, and those who already know a lot about the lore can immediately recognize some of these terms. First, the prophet mentioned right at the start refers to the prophet of ancient Remuria called Sibylla, also known as the Golden Bee. I'll talk about her more later in the artifact lore, so I'll just quickly tell you some of the basics. Well, obviously, as she is called the prophet, she had powers which allowed her to foretell the future of Remuria. Eventually, she sacrificed herself for the sake of creating the Phobos, aka Remus's symphony, with which he planned to save all of humanity before its decline. Eventually, as we learn in the new Remuria world quest, his plan failed because Sibylla lacked sufficient will and wanted to just satisfy the wishes of all humans, which is why the Phobos started malfunctioning and eventually failed. Next, the ruler mentioned in the description is obviously the god king Remus, and the fell dragon Scylla, who we also meet in the Remuria world quest I mentioned before. You probably heard about these two already, so I won't introduce them any further. The grand opera of the Golden Age then refers to Remuria and the Phobos, and the rest is just some in-game talk, so not really lore relevant. Then there is the second description. Under the direction of an immortal musician, a certain ancient troupe once performed the elegies of an ancient civilization. With the passage of time, the ancient place became legend. Legend became myth, until one day, by chance, it was deliberately picked up once more and became the prelude of a new dream. Which doesn't really include much lore at all. The only important thing here is probably the ancient troupe mentioned, which is probably the Golden Troupe, which is described in the Golden Troupe artifact set logically. Then there is an immortal musician, which is probably Remus, and that's probably it. Now, let's move on to the actual artifact lore. I only read the short description every time and the parts that I feel are important to the purpose of this video. So I'll begin with the flower, called Harmonious Symphony Prelude, which is described as an honorary medal in the shape of a blooming flower. Adorned with blue stone and gold, it was once bestowed upon immortals. First, it talks about the age when the waters of the high sea were not yet Remurian. Then it mentions a god, that's probably Remus, and it states that he lost his homeland. It also says that he was once a singer of the oases, but his home has been lost beneath the light of King Deshret, and because he wasn't willing to serve Deshret, he chose to wander around. So this means that he was originally from the Sumeru desert area, but then there was Gurabad under the rule of King Deshret. And we know that Gurabad predates Remuria, so this all so far corresponds to what we already know from the lore. And yes, this is the obligatory Deshret mention. Then Remus traveled lower below the abyssal depths, to the source of all waters, which is probably the primordial sea, where he intended to die. And there was supposed to be a city that no history ever chronicled, and there he passed through a ruined temple beneath the silver-white cedar, which means Irminsul. This part of the description really confuses me, and I don't know what this could refer to, because the only civilization I know about that was beneath Irminsul is Khaenri'ah, but Khaenri'ah, as far as I know, wasn't supposed to exist at this point in time. Anyway, there he heard the whispers of the golden bees circling Irminsul, that basically told him that it was fate that he came here, and that the golden bee once protected Irminsul, but now it has lost its mind and form. But even then, it can see the future where Remus has many cities and subjects. His nation will flourish and prosper, and he will rule over the high sea. But eventually, the justice he will bring them will also be their downfall, which probably refers to the Phobos and how it eventually, instead of saving Remuria, led to its destruction. Then the bee says that if he is still willing to continue despite all this, it will show him the way up. Then he answers that there isn't even a choice if this is what fate decrees, and if he truly had a choice to choose, then he would change the end it mentioned. When he said those words, a golden ship appeared before him. And by the way, this golden bee is the prophet Sibylla I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, and the prophecy it told him was then called Fortuna. So this part of lore basically told us how Remus met Sibylla close to Irminsul, which is by the way very interesting, and how he began creating Remuria and defying fate. I wonder what it means that the golden bee was supposed to protect Irminsul, but it has lost its form. Maybe it's related to how Irminsul had to be protected from the forbidden knowledge during the Canrian cataclysm. Maybe by this point in time there was another similar catastrophe, like for example it could have been the war between the ancient dragons and the primordial one, because we know that the Dragon King Nibelung used forbidden knowledge to fight the heavenly principles. Maybe that's why Irminsul needed to be protected. Anyway, I am also surprised about the fact that Irminsul even existed by this point in time, because I always thought that there may be a connection between King Irmin from the Canrian Eclipse dynasty and Irminsul, because of all that we know about these two so far. But now it seems that Irminsul predates King Irmin, and by a large amount. Or at least that's what it looks like to me after reading through this piece of lore. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we got any other confirmation in the past as to how old Irminsul could actually be, so maybe this description is an important clue. Anyway, now I'll talk about the feather called Ancient Sea's Nocturnal Musing, which is described as a feather accessory carved in the shape of wings of the golden bees of legend. They seem to flutter with the slightest breeze. The lore talks about the age when King Remus already started to build his nation by building a tower in Meropis, which is by the way basically another version of Atlantis, and it is where the inspiration for the fortress of Meropide is from. This era is described as an era of peace. Remus says to Sibylla that everything is going just as she foretold, but the more prosperous and glorious his nation becomes, the more sad and worried he is because of the prophecy. The Golden Bee replies that the Fortuna, aka the prophesied fate, will happen, and that we are all enslaved by destiny, and that he cannot change the inevitable end. And she likens the prophecy to a thrilling drama that was already written before the curtain rose. Which obviously reminds me of what happened in Fontaine, our conquest, and not only there, so at this point it's probably safe to say that this fate of destruction is a recurring theme for all the past samsaras, or even the present civilizations. Even though he was fully aware that eternity was a foolish fantasy and immortality was a blind delusion, he still couldn't abide the prophesied future. Even though they foresaw the fated judgment, they didn't know the cause of the destruction. But Egeria, who was the Hydro-Archon, and in this description it is said that she has been imprisoned in the Primordial Sea by that time, may have the answer. To summarize, Remus started to build Remuria and everything was going well. The nation was prospering and all, but he was still worried about the prophesied end, and so he probably decided to search for the help of Egeria. Next, I'll talk about the sense, which is called the Grand Shape of the Turning of Fate, and it is described as a timepiece made in imitation of the Wheel of Fate. It ceased turning long ago. It talks about the age before the Grand Symphony was played and Sibylla was still present. To find out how to fight the prophecy, Remus set out to find the Primordial Sea. Beneath the High Sea dwelt the Bishops, which are basically dragons in Genshin, including the Prince of Bishops, who we now know is called Scylla. Scylla once served the Hydro Dragon Sovereign, but now he guarded the prison where Egeria was imprisoned. Remus and Scylla battled for some time, and then he finally decided to tell Scylla why he even came here. Upon hearing it, Scylla started laughing and said that he fears that fate, but he doesn't even know what the Bishops have suffered over all of these years, which probably refers to how they lost the war against the Heavenly Principles. Scylla tells him that he should know that fate cannot be changed unless he revolts against the heavens, but if he truly wishes to do this, then Scylla will take him to Egeria. But even after meeting her, he found no answer. Egeria also committed a sin, and we already know exactly what that means, thanks to the Fontaine Arc conquest, and this sin resulted in the prophecy of Fontaine. After all is done, he says that if the waters will devour his subjects, then he will seal all their souls in ichor that is insoluble by waters, and that if time will rot Remuria, then he will forge them immortal bodies of bronze and stone. I think that this description is overall quite self-explanatory. To summarize, he went to see Egeria, but he met the dragon Scylla on his way and battled with it. Then he finally met Egeria and she told him that she suffers from a similar prophecy and that she can't help him, so he decided to fight fate basically by giving his people immortal bodies. Now let's look at the goblet called Ichor Shower Rhapsody, which is described as a Rhyton fire with copper as the base, that was once filled with fine wine from paradise. This talks about the age when Remuria was already established and it was flourishing, but Remus still didn't have a proper answer to the prophecy that awaited Remuria. However, Remus wasn't in despair, instead he was motivated to find the flaw in the prophecy. And after countless days he grasped the mysteries of Fortuna, aka the prophesied fate. He read every note of fate and then he decided to compose his own symphony. Remus wanted Sibylla to help him with this and to sacrifice herself, which she did, without any hesitation. The harmonious symphony would then break the shackles of fate, and Remus would hand fate to humanity's own hands. When that day finally came, rich or poor, sage or savage, everyone could control their own fates, but in Sibyl's eyes there was already no future. To summarize, Remus decided to control fate by creating his grand symphony, aka the Phobos, and it actually worked, at least for some time. The last piece is a circlet called Whimsical Dance of the Withered, which is described as a mask once covered in gold leaf. Perhaps it is a relic from some ancient officer of the legions. It describes the age when the Domus Aurea was already reduced to rubble and when Remuria lay buried beneath the waves. In the end, the judgment came as promised. This part is explained very well in the new world quest, where it's described in detail how exactly the Phobos fade and such. When Fontaine was formed, Remuria already faded into legend and Remus couldn't avert the destruction of his nation. Later in the world quest we find out that at the very last moment, Remus was actually aware that the Phobos malfunctioned and tried to destroy it with the help of Scylla. But Phobos had kind of taken control of his army and used a trap to defeat and seal Scylla. So in the end, it's interesting that Fontaine was actually able to escape the ending of the prophecy, kind of, because from my point of view, René aka Narzenkreuz already confirmed to us that the same fate repeats itself again and again, and that the same ending was going to happen in Fontaine as well. The only variable that could have affected the result was the Traveler, because Teyvat doesn't consider him a part of itself, so basically any prophecy or even René's calculations don't involve the existence of the Traveler. And this means that the Descenders are technically the only ones able to defy fate. At least that's how I understand it. The rest of this artifact description is mostly poetic, without any important lore, but the last line is very interesting. In the end, all dreams shall merge into one, bringing ultimate salvation to all the people of the world. I may be crazy, but this line sounds like some serious foreshadowing to me, and it very much reminds me of all these plans to save the fallen nations of Genshin. Like the line, all dreams shall merge into one, really reminds me of the golden Sombra King Dashel was trying to build for his people, or the plan of Narzenkreuz, where he wanted to merge all the wills of people together to fight the prophecy of Fontaine. Maybe at the very end of the Teyvat chapter, this theme could repeat, maybe the Tsaritsa has some similar plan, or maybe even the Abyss Order does have one. Anyway, that's all for this video. I hope you liked this very lore heavy talk, not much of a theory talk, but just a lot of raw lore. Well, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.